Many years ago, when I was first recruited into wealth management, one of the very first lessons that they taught us was that fear and greed were always the primary motivators to any significant market moves. Now, initially, that seemed to make a whole lot of sense, but it was really only over time, after watching markets move and more importantly, seeing how people responded to it, that I gained that deeper revelation, that deeper understanding of the validity of that. And increasingly, that empowered me to disengage emotionally, not to be caught up in the hype, but to reflect upon what was really going on, and over time gave us greater success. But specifically, I want to focus on one that is probably the most powerful motivators, and that's the fear of missing out. Now, let me say before we start, I will share this and people will comment, oh yeah, that makes sense. But it's not the cognitive understanding, but rather understanding that the fear of missing out is so powerful that it subconsciously manipulates us to literally suspend our own principles, as I'll share in a moment. But fear of missing out is basically the idea that the more momentum something has, that it creates this emotional groundswell and literally creates that sense that if you don't get in, you're missing out, that it highlights that disparity between the haves and the have-nots. And this is your opportunity or you will miss out. Now, it's also magnified by the fact, the recognition that it's already started to move and you missed out on that. So it creates, again, a sense of urgency even on that I better jump fast because I've already begun to miss out. And it is manipulated by justification. See, the more powerful a move is, the more information will be out there that appears to support why that massive movement is happening. Now, rather than true reasons, it is justification, but it amplifies that urgency because what we see is movement, and then there seems to be logical reasons behind it. And so what happens is, so often I've seen people miss out on God's best because they have the sense they've got to chase something, they've got to get it or miss out. Now, as I'll share in a moment, we play by a different set of rules, and we have an opportunity for outsized success. But first, let me give you an understanding of what I developed as my personal response. The greater momentum something had, and it doesn't matter what market, what it is, stock market, crypto, gold, as we've seen the last few years, real estate, whatever it is, they all operate on the same principle. And so what I have come to is the realization, the standpoint of the greater momentum something has, the greater reluctance, the greater skepticism on my part to get involved. And I'll share how that impacted clients. And more importantly, the uglier something became, the worse it appeared, the more optimistic, the more I was searching out for the opportunities God would have. Now, I said I would share we saw how this impacted clients, because remember, while this makes sense logically, what I saw when I was still managing money was that as much as that made sense logically, it would create this situation where subconsciously our emotions would override our decision making. And I saw this so often with clients. So when I would begin to express skepticism, their reluctance to back away, and worse, when things were bad. This is when we were excited. This is when outsized success came through. Now, that all sounds good in principle, or as Warren Buffett, probably the world's most famous investor, once said, the best opportunities are when there's blood in the streets. Now, again, that all sounds reasonable when you're not in the middle of that pressure. And what we saw was, successful, affluent, well-grounded clients, how they were manipulated by the emotions. That when things were ugly, the reluctance, that the news, the justification will always, when it's bad, continue to reinforce the bad. That's where the opportunity is. And when things were booming, when you're wanting to tap the brakes, again, fluent, intelligent, well-grounded people manipulated by it. So it's easy to think, well, we would be different. But we do need to take a different approach. And so let me share. So for you and I, as I said, we play by a different set of rules. See, as God's people, as heirs to His kingdom, we have the opportunity to be led by the Spirit. Now, for some of you, you may feel like you've got a pretty good handle on recognizing God's leading. That's great. But obviously for others, while you may be working towards that, it still may seem a little vague. So I'm going to give you a specific way to approach things. That when any market, any situation has got real momentum. So first off, the more powerful, more that sense that you are missing out if you don't get in, the more I would take the approach of, unless God makes it powerfully clear that this is for me, I'm going to stand on the sidelines. Now, this takes massive intestinal fortitude. Again, one of those things, much easier said than done. But literally, the more momentum something has, the more I'm kind of taking a little bit of a, you might call it a passive approach, that I want God to tap me on the shoulder, so to speak, and say, jump in. That I'm literally waiting for God to make it clear this is right, that I'm not going to be manipulated emotionally. But when things start to turn ugly, that's when not only am I more optimistic, but I am more proactively going to God asking for the right opportunity. And both of these require us to set aside our feelings or emotions and rather recognize that it's not about what's happening, but it's about trusting God that He has the right opportunities for you and I. See, God's kingdom works pretty much counter to the world's wisdom. And God's greatest blessing, His greatest opportunity, His outsized successes come not when circumstances are aligned, but rather when we're following His Spirit, when we're responding to His direction, that God can position us for that outsized success. That we want to avoid fear missing out, that we don't let it distract and derail us, but rather we use this as another opportunity to exercise being led by the Spirit.